You'll never believe what happened in courtroom 3B. Don't ever assume that a courtroom is where justice lives. Until you've seen what happens when power meets someone brave enough to challenge it. Before we dive in, let me ask you something. From one grown soul to another, how are you? How's your health? The kids doing all right? Grandkids maybe? Is your sister still down in Atlanta? I hope this season's been kind to your heart, because what I'm about to share might just turn your stomach. It's not a movie. It's not fiction. It's a story soaked in truth, pain, and something deeper, the rage of a woman who's had enough. Courtroom 3B was packed, not with press or TV cameras, but with the quiet tension of a place where secrets come to die. That morning, Danielle Brooks walked in wearing a simple gray skirt, low heels, and a navy blouse that said, "I didn't come to play, but I didn't come to shout either." She was a Black woman in her late 30s, strong jawline, tight curls, and eyes that could freeze fire. People underestimated her all the time. Today would be no different. The defendant, a well-connected real estate tycoon accused of laundering campaign funds. The judge, the Honorable Gregory M. Walton, white, 63, with silver hair, a gavel like a war hammer, and a reputation for giving hard love to Black defendants. He'd never say the word racist, but you could feel it in his pauses. Danielle was called as a witness. Her testimony wasn't bombastic, it was damning. She laid out dates, names, whispered conversations recorded in parking lots, bank transfers routed through dummy charities. She didn't flinch, she didn't embellish, she just told the truth. Judge Walton didn't like that. "You're done," he snapped as she stepped down. "No, sir," she replied. I said, "You're done." He stood from the bench. "You may be dismissed from this building entirely." She turned calmly. That's when he did the unthinkable. He stepped down from the bench and slapped her across the face. A gasp ricocheted through the courtroom. One woman screamed. A bailiff took a step forward, then froze, unsure of what to do. Danielle's head had turned from the force, but her body stood rooted. She slowly turned back toward him, eyes locked. "You just made a mistake," she said, voice steady. Because what Judge Walton didn't know was this. Danielle Brooks wasn't just a witness. She was a federal undercover agent, sent in to expose corruption in the courts. And the cameras? They were rolling from angles he never knew existed. Danielle didn't flinch, not after the slap, not when the room trembled with silence, not even when two bailiffs hesitated at the edge of chaos, waiting for a cue that would never come. Because she wasn't waiting for orders. She pulled out her badge, small, discreet, federal, and laid it gently on the prosecution's table like a loaded gun. FBI. Someone in the gallery gasped audibly. Another person whispered, "Oh my God." Judge Walton blinked, then laughed, a dry, cracked thing. "This is a stunt," he said. "An entrapment. This woman's lying." But the courtroom had already shifted. The weight of the moment had moved, and he wasn't the one holding it anymore. Danielle had been undercover for 7 months. 7 months of silence, of pretending to be just another Black woman forgotten in the system. She'd sat in courtrooms where white defendants got slaps on the wrist and Black mothers got years for a forged check. She had smiled politely through Walton's smirks, endured his patronizing lectures, and watched him dismiss evidence that could have saved innocent lives. But this mission, it was never about one man. It was about the system that trained men like him to think they could get away with anything. And he just proved their case on camera. The U.S. Attorney's Office was already watching. They had built a case slowly, meticulously, but they needed a trigger, a moment of public outrage to turn whispers into headlines. And Walton's slap was a matchstick on gasoline. As the courtroom emptied under emergency protocol, Danielle stayed behind, Alone for a moment with the marble walls and echoes of injustice, she didn't cry. She didn't smile either. She just stood there thinking of all the women before her, mothers, sisters, warriors, who had been silenced in rooms just like this. Not today. The media got hold of the footage within 2 hours. That night, every major outlet ran the headline, "Federal agent assaulted by sitting judge during testimony." And under it, a photo of Danielle, badge in hand, cheek still red, eyes full of quiet fire. But you have to ask yourself, what kind of man hits a woman in open court? And what kind of system lets him believe he could? The morning after the video went viral, Judge Walton's front lawn looked like a war zone of microphones, CNN, NBC, Fox. Even bloggers with cell phones stood behind yellow tape, throwing questions like daggers. "Judge Walton, did you knowingly assault a federal agent? Were you aware she was working with the FBI? Are you going to resign, sir?" Inside, Walton sat at his kitchen table in silence. His wife hadn't spoken to him since sunrise. His son, a corporate lawyer in Chicago, texted only 3 words, "What the hell?" At the FBI field office, Danielle sat across from her handler, Special Agent Mark Lyle. He was white, early 50s, grizzled in a fatherly way, and the only man in her orbit she trusted. "You did everything right," he said, sliding her a cup of black coffee. She didn't answer. She stared at the folder in front of her. Inside were names, dozens of them, judges, clerks, lawyers, all connected to a network of kickbacks, sentence manipulation, and campaign laundering. But one name kept her eyes locked: Judge Walton's mentor, former Chief Justice Paul Landrum, retired untouchable, a god in Southern legal circles. "You're saying it goes back that far?" she asked. Lyle nodded. "And further." Danielle's role was no longer just undercover. Now she was the center of the investigation. Her slap, her blood, her silence, her fire had pulled the veil off a courthouse haunted by ghosts in black robes. That week, Danielle's past came knocking. Her mother, Joyce, called from Baton Rouge. "Baby, what are you doing messing with these men? These white men don't forget. You know what they did to Uncle Leon." Danielle sighed, the way only black daughters sigh when they know their mama's not wrong. "Mama, Uncle Leon didn't have a badge. I do. That badge won't save you in the dark." And there was darkness waiting. Danielle's apartment was broken into 2 nights later. Nothing was stolen, but her file cabinet had been opened, and one page was missing, the page with Landrum's name on it. Her pulse didn't rise. She was past fear. Instead, she started packing a go bag, burner phone, cash. Not because she was running, but because the next part of the mission meant stepping into the lion's mouth. But tell me this, friend. Would you keep going if you knew the system could swallow you whole? Would you still chase justice, knowing no badge, no camera, no backup could guarantee your safety? Danielle Brooks was about to find out. The walls inside the private lodge were made of dark mahogany. No court seals here, no bailiffs, just smoke, bourbon, and power. Judge Paul Landrum sat at the head of the long table. Even retired, he wore the aura of authority like a second skin. He wasn't worried about Danielle Brooks, not yet. Across from him sat Gregory Walton, still shaken, hands trembling slightly as he nursed a glass of scotch. "I didn't know she was with the Bureau," Walton muttered. Landrum didn't blink. "That's because you weren't supposed to. Your job was to control the room, not lose it." "You think they'll indict?" "I think," Landrum said slowly, "they've been trying to get inside this circle for a decade, and now they've found their Trojan horse." Back in D.C., Danielle wasn't waiting for the next move. She was making it. With Agent Lyle's clearance, she filed a request to testify before the Judicial Oversight Committee, a hearing that would be public, live-streamed, and on record. There were risks, massive ones. She'd be exposing not just Walton, but the intricate, ugly pipeline of power that connected retired judges, developers, and even state senators. Her name would be known, her face remembered. But this wasn't about exposure anymore. It was about legacy. Danielle thought of her grandmother, who once told her, "Every system built against us was built to survive storms. Be the one who brings the flood." And that's exactly what she planned to do. But power doesn't go quietly. It claws back. A week before her testimony, a package arrived at the FBI office with no return address. Inside was a USB drive. It contained surveillance footage, grainy but clear. It showed Danielle 6 months earlier, meeting with a confidential informant in a parking garage. Nothing illegal, but the video was edited to look like an exchange of money, blackmail, a smear campaign in the making. They were playing dirty now, and Danielle knew if they were willing to twist tape, they might be willing to twist something much worse. Lives, truth, even her freedom. Her lawyer, Clarice Benton, a sharp, relentless Black woman in her late 40s, reviewed the footage and leaned back in her chair. "They're scared. You're shaking something real. They're trying to frame me before I can open my mouth." Clarice smiled. "Then open it louder." The day of the hearing approached, and so did something else, a threat. Scrawled across the door of her apartment building in red paint, "Go quiet or go dead." But Danielle had made her decision. She would walk into that courtroom, alone if she had to. "Let me ask you this. What would you risk to bring down a kingdom built on silence?" Danielle Brooks was about to step into the fire with nothing but truth as her shield. The hearing room was colder than expected. Fluorescent lights buzzed like anxious thoughts, and the wood-paneled walls bore witness to centuries of voices, both courageous and corrupt. Danielle Brooks sat straight-backed at the witness table, hands folded, jaw tight. She had worn black, not to mourn, but to mark the end of pretense. Before her, a semicircle of senators watched closely. Most were men, most were white. Some smiled politely. Others looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Her lawyer, Clarice Benton, nodded from behind. "Say it all," she had whispered before Danielle took the oath. The chair tapped his mic. "Miss Brooks, you may proceed." Danielle leaned into the microphone. "My name is Danielle Brooks. I'm a federal agent with the Department of Justice. For 7 months, I operated undercover in the state judicial system. What I found was not just bias, not just misconduct. What I found was a network, a brotherhood of judges, clerks, and outside interests, trading freedom for favors, Black lives for political gain, and I was assaulted on the record by Judge Gregory Walton, not because I was a threat to order, but because I was a threat to control." The room froze. A few pens stopped scribbling. She continued, "These men sit behind robes and gavels, but they do not serve justice. They serve each other. They pass around influence like cigars in back rooms. They silence people who speak. They gaslight women who resist. And if you're poor or Black or both, your life is a bargaining chip." There were murmurs. A senator leaned into his aide. Another rubbed his temple. "I brought evidence. I brought tapes. I brought documents. But what I really brought was a mirror. And I want this country to look at itself. I want this committee to look at the cost of silence." Her voice cracked, but not from weakness, from rage. "I shouldn't have to be brave to be believed." Behind her, Clarice swallowed hard. 2 rows back, Special Agent Lyle clenched his jaw. Across the room, a camera zoomed in as Danielle turned to the panel with steel in her voice. "You want my statement? Here it is. I'm not here to ask permission. I'm here to tell you, you cannot fix a system you refuse to admit is broken." The room erupted, not in applause, but in something heavier. Truth. And you, reader, let me ask you, when was the last time someone stood up for you when they had everything to lose? Would you do the same? Danielle Brooks just did. And the avalanche had begun. The hearing went viral within hours. Clips of Danielle's testimony flooded social media. Black Twitter lit up with hashtags. Daytime talk shows debated her courage. Late-night hosts cracked careful jokes about Judge Walton's retirement plans. But power doesn't bleed out in public. It retreats, regroups, then strikes back in silence. 2 days after the hearing, Danielle's personnel file was leaked. Falsified reports, old reprimands that didn't exist, fabricated misconduct. By morning, cable news was asking, was Danielle Brooks even qualified to testify? Is this another case of the FBI planting activists? She stood in her apartment, watching headlines flicker across the screen, coffee cold in her hand. Agent Lyle called her the moment the story broke. They're throwing smoke bombs, trying to shift the narrative. Danielle didn't flinch. I expected fire, not fog. But the next move was even dirtier. They went after her family. Her younger brother Malik, a schoolteacher in Baton Rouge, was randomly stopped, searched, and cuffed for a broken taillight. Her mother got a threatening phone call in the middle of the night. And just like that, her bravery became her family's burden. She flew home the next weekend against Lyle's advice. Her mother sat on the porch, Bible in her lap, shotgun not far from reach. "You stirred something, baby," she said without looking up. "And the devil don't like stirred pots." Danielle nodded. "I stirred it on purpose." At night, she couldn't sleep. Memories came like waves. Her first arrest at 19 for talking back to a cop. Her first courtroom observation as a law student, the sting of knowing that even a badge wouldn't protect her if her skin made her a threat. A week later, something unexpected happened. An anonymous email landed in her inbox. It contained sealed court documents, on the record, dates, payments, and at the top of the PDF was a name she hadn't seen since the beginning, Judge Paul Landrum. It wasn't over, it was bigger. Landrum wasn't just a mentor to Walton, he was the architect, and someone from the inside wanted him gone. So now Danielle had a choice: go public again and risk full character assassination, or go underground and build a case with enough weight to sink an empire. Let me ask you this: would you risk your name, your life, your blood for the truth Danielle Brooks already had? And she was just getting started. The file was deep, too deep to be public. It wasn't just court records, it was testimony. Whistleblower statements, internal memos marked for judicial eyes only. And it all pointed back to one man, Paul Landrum, the once revered Chief Justice, the Kingmaker, the man who built a network so airtight, not even internal investigations could touch it, until now. Danielle didn't forward the file to the FBI. Not yet. She wanted to be sure. She needed more than paper. She needed someone inside. She went to the one person who might still owe her something, Judge Myra Tennyson, retired Black. Once a rising star in the judiciary until Landrum crushed her appointment to the state's Supreme Court. No official reason ever given, just silence. Danielle found her in a modest home outside Savannah, garden full of collards and quiet. Tennyson opened the door slowly. "You must be the girl who got slapped on TV." "I'm the woman who's about to slap back," Danielle said. They talked for hours over sweet tea and trembling hands. Tennyson laid out everything. "Landrum has a private database, buried in a secure server, every deal, every bribe, every judge who ever took one. I've seen it. He keeps it in case someone ever turns." "Where?" Danielle asked. "Lexington, old law school office he never gave up, but you didn't hear that from me." That night, Danielle drove 5 hours in silence. She didn't tell Lyle. She didn't text Clarice. This wasn't about the Bureau anymore. This was personal. She broke into the building at 2:13 a.m. A forgotten floor, dusty with disuse. But the server room was real, locked, cold, humming. She didn't hack it. She copied it, all of it, onto a drive she wore around her neck. It was heavy, not in weight, but in meaning. The next day, she delivered it to Agent Lyle without a word, just a look. "You sure?" he asked. She nodded. "It's time." By noon, warrants were issued. By midnight, arrests were made. And just before dawn, Paul Landrum was taken from his lake house in cuffs, robe still hanging on the back of his chair. But here's the part you won't believe. The moment Landrum saw Danielle watching from across the parking lot, he smiled. "Took you long enough," he said, "because men like him never expect to lose. They expect to return. And you, watching from your living room, tell me, if justice finally knocks, but the guilty still smirk, have we really won yet?" Danielle Brooks had cracked the circle, but the war wasn't over, not by a long shot. Landrum's arrest sent shockwaves through the judicial world. News anchors stumbled over their words, trying to reconcile the fall of a man who once handed out law like scripture. Legal forums exploded. Think pieces were published by the hour. But while the world was stunned, Danielle was studying the silence, because not everyone was outraged. Some were too quiet. Inside the Justice Department, a meeting was called behind closed doors. Danielle wasn't invited, but Clarice was. When she came out, her face was tight. "They're trying to cut a deal." Danielle blinked. "A deal with him?" "Immunity for cooperation. He names 10 judges, keeps his pension, gets house arrest, no jail time." Danielle laughed once, a hollow, angry sound. "He builds a criminal empire in robes, and you want to give him a patio sentence?" Clarice shook her head. "They're scared. He knows too much. He is the system." Danielle leaned forward, eyes like steel. "Then maybe it's time to break the system." That night, she went on national television, live, unfiltered. She didn't talk about cases or evidence. She told stories, human ones, of a 17-year-old sentenced to 12 years for shoplifting, of a mother who lost custody because she couldn't afford bail, of judges who laughed at defendants who couldn't read. "This isn't about corruption," she said. "It's about a disease, and men like Paul Landrum were the carriers. You don't make deals with disease. You fight it. You cut it out." The clip went viral. The Justice Department got flooded with calls, petitions, threats of protest. And for once, the people outshouted the power. Landrum's deal was killed. His trial was set. And Danielle was called as star witness. But power has long fingers. The week before the trial, an old video surfaced. Danielle in college, shouting at a campus protest, angry, raw. She'd cursed. She'd said things she didn't remember. "FBI's Golden Girl not so clean," the headline said. It didn't matter that she was 19. It didn't matter that it was out of context. It was enough to plant a seed of doubt. In court, Landrum sat smug. Defense attorneys smiled like sharks. "Ms. Brooks, were you ever arrested? Did you once call the U.S. government a plantation system? Are you biased against white male authority?" Each question was a poison needle, but Danielle stood firm. "Yes, I was angry because I saw injustice. Yes, I used words because silence wasn't working. And yes, I'm biased. I'm biased for the truth." The gallery was dead quiet. Even Landrum blinked, because truth, when said aloud without fear, still has the power to shake walls. Now let me ask you, if they dragged your past into the light to discredit your truth, would you still speak it? Danielle Brooks did, even as the courtroom turned into a battleground, and the final judgment was coming. The courtroom was a machine of breath and silence. 12 jurors, one truth, and the weight of a nation in the pause between words. Danielle Brooks sat alone at the witness bench, fingers laced as Judge Mallory, a different judge this time, a black woman from North Carolina, asked for order in the court. Paul Landrum didn't look afraid. He looked bored. For 3 weeks, the prosecution laid it all bare. Audio recordings, financial trails that looped like nooses. Whistleblowers turned state's witness, trembling but resolute. But Landrum's lawyers were slick. They made it all sound like politics, like revenge. A crusade by an emotionally unstable woman, one attorney said. A conspiracy driven by resentment and ambition. And each time those words left their lips, Danielle felt her grandmother's voice whisper in her mind. They will always try to rewrite the story. Your job is to never let them own the pen. The jury went into deliberation on a Tuesday afternoon. Hours passed, then a day, then 2. The city buzzed like a live wire. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse. Pundits picked sides like it was a sports match. Everyone had an opinion. But inside that box of 12, something sacred was still holding: doubt, hope, and the unbearable question of what justice actually means. Danielle walked the city those nights, alone, no security detail, no press in tow. She passed courthouses, jails, schools. She passed a little girl on a stoop, drawing chalk on concrete. The girl looked up, blinked, then said, "You're that lady." The brave one. Danielle crouched down, smiling. "What makes you say I'm brave?" "You told the truth." "My mama said that's the bravest thing anybody can do." Friday morning, the jury had reached a verdict. Landrum walked in with confidence tucked under his chin. Danielle walked in with silence wrapped around her ribs like armor. The foreman stood. On the count of judicial conspiracy, guilty. On the count of racketeering, guilty. On the count of obstruction of justice, guilty. The room inhaled all at once, then erupted. Landrum's face didn't crack, not even as he was handcuffed. But Danielle saw it, just for a second. That flicker, the first taste of a man who'd never known consequence. Outside, the crowd exploded. Tears, chants, raised fists and fallen knees. And Danielle, she didn't celebrate, she just breathed. Because justice wasn't a victory, it was a beginning. But let me ask you, if you finally won the fight of your life, what would you do the next morning, knowing the system that tried to crush you is still standing? Because Danielle Brooks woke up and got back to work. The verdict changed headlines, it changed conversations. But did it change the world? Danielle Brooks wasn't sure. 2 months after Landrum's conviction, she stood in a community center on the south side of Chicago, speaking to a room of high school students. No cameras, no news crews, just kids in a folding chair. "You know what surprised me the most?" she asked them. It wasn't the slap. It wasn't the trial. It was how fast people tried to go back to normal, like the rot wasn't still in the walls. Because justice doesn't end with a gavel. It doesn't tie itself up in speeches and sentencing. It lingers. It asks for more. And sometimes it asks everything. Danielle had lost things along the way. Her job resigned quietly after bureaucratic backlash. Her apartment moved 3 times after threats became too regular. Friends, some turned cold, some turned cautious. But she'd gained something rarer, clarity, the kind that only comes after you bleed for your beliefs. Clarice opened her own law firm, dedicated to defending whistleblowers. Agent Lyle retired early, but not before submitting one final internal report, the Danielle Protocol, a new procedure to protect agents embedded in judicial investigations. And Danielle, she wrote a book, a lecture circuit, but mostly she listened to women, to victims, to those still in the fight. Then one spring morning, she got a letter, no return address, no stamp, just a handwritten note. "You ruined everything. But I admire the hell out of you." No name, but she knew who it was. Power doesn't always die. Sometimes it just retreats. And here's the part I want you to remember. Danielle never got a statue, no Netflix deal, no magazine cover, but walk through certain communities, through courthouses where reforms were forced, where judges now sit a little straighter, and you'll feel her fingerprints. Let me tell you something, justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just a woman refusing to stay silent. Sometimes it's a Black woman with a scar on her cheek, a fire in her chest, and a badge no longer pinned to her shirt, but engraved in her story. And now I ask you, what systems in your life still go unchecked? What truths in your circle are still waiting to be said? Who do you know that's brave enough to speak? And who's still watching from the sidelines? Because if Danielle's journey shows us anything, it's that justice is never handed to us. It's dragged into the lap by someone willing to be broken for the sake of building something better. This story isn't fiction. It's reality with different names. If it moved you, stirred something in you, don't just feel. ACT like this. Share this. Comment your thoughts. Tag someone who needs to hear it. And most of all, subscribe to the channel, Black Women. Because we don't just tell stories here, we pass the torch. Danielle Brooks walked through the fire so the next woman could walk through the door. Are you ready to hold that door open?